I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby here with Manhunt production designer Chloe Arbiture. Chloe, let's get back to the beginning. You've signed onto a prestige period drama that will require a number of sets and locations set during the Victorian era that many of us know quite well in a flashpoint in American history. That's no pressure, right?
Right, right. Yeah. It was a really incredible phone call to get. I was very excited to get it. Manhunt ended up being kind of my dream project as a production designer.
And why is that?
Um, you know, I think just the period alone has so many incredible layers and details. Um, but also after speaking with Monica Beletsky, the showrunner, and her vision for the show, she really wanted something standout and unique, and she really didn't want to shy away from color and texture and grit and layers. And that's not something you always get in a period piece. I mean, oftentimes period pieces are sepia toned and desaturated and very buttoned up and very neat and tidy. And it was really exciting to make a world that was really those things.
Actually, it's a great point because on a show set in this period, with I was expecting, like drab, dark, damp, monochrome. This is what we've seen before around the time of Lincoln's assassination, and I was so taken with the approach that you took, which was more ornate and decorative and warmer than I initially expected. Talk me through those choices that you made.
Well, something that we all really were drawn to is the ornamentation of the Victorian era. And, there wasn't really anything in that period that wasn't designed. And that's something sort of in our modern lives we've gotten away from. Things, even though things are designed, just that level of ornamentation isn't there any longer. And so we, we all, when I say we all, I really mean like myself, Monica, our costume designer, Katie, like those, we were kind of the trifecta, like pushing forward um like a much richer world for this. And I think it's because we wanted modern audiences to relate to it and to feel like there was a stake in it. And I think when we look through, I mean, even myself, I'm guilty of it. When I look through black and white photographs, I don't really feel like this big human connection to things. But we all talked about how what makes a story human is color, is richness, is detail. And that's something that really drove us through the entire creative process from the beginning to the end.
You're so right. When you're looking at a historical photo, sometimes you do feel a bit removed from it and not in the moment. You don't remember that these are human beings dealing with real
Right.
stresses and crises. And that's why Monica's vision of having the story set on Edward Stanton's journey, so to speak, after the assassination was just perfect. It really put me in the moment. And your designs, I must say, by the way, there was a lot. I felt like the volume on this show was really something else. Is that an accurate statement that it was a huge undertaking? There was a lot that you needed to design and construct.
Yeah, it was a Herculean task. I mean, I, I think like naively in the beginning, I thought it wasn't that big or that, we shot in Savannah, Georgia, and I guess I assumed um, we would be doing a lot more on location than we ended up doing. We ended up building a ton of sets. And overall, we had over 200 interiors that we had to design. So, um, but that's the nature of the show. It's a show that's continually moving. It's moving through different cities. It's in sometimes in a different country. It goes to Montreal. So, yeah. And I mean, in terms of Stanton, it's really important that the audience related to him, I think, from the get-go, because he's like not a character in American history we really, at least I, didn't know much about. But he actually was like a huge fan of like pageantry, and he was kind of a his home was like very well decorated and like very colorful. And so we thought, sometimes like the truth is better than anything we can come up with. And so we really to lean into that, especially in his environments. I know that Katie and I, the costume designer, really collaborated the most on anything related to Stanton, so that like every scene with him really popped.
Yeah. The scale alone just blows my mind that you have a project like that. And then the layer of historical accuracy, wanting to take a new approach to bring an audience along for the journey. So that's a lot. So you had your work cut out for you. And I was thinking, what would be the one set? Because I would expect, the halls of power where all the deliberations were happening, or the barn. And when I say the barn, I think people know what I mean.
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
Ford Theatre. Like, tell me what set was really the most critical that took the longest to get right?
Um, we spent a lot of time designing the War Department, and that is sort of Stanton's hub of where he conducts basically the entire Civil War from. And there's no surviving visual records of what that space looked like. So we talked with a historian who kind of gave us the history of the telegraph, which, like, fascinatingly, Stanton and Lincoln really revolutionized that technology, and the War Department was one of the first places where the amount of telegraphs able to be both sent and received was in the War Department, and that's technology that really got pushed further through in the Civil War. And but there are records that it was sort of an ad hoc. In the beginning, it was sort of an ad hoc space in an old library. So we started with that idea. And then, of course, we combed through like any available resource. So I had researchers like digging through biographies and like the Library of Congress. I mean, any nugget we could find about that space. And we didn't find a ton, really. So we leaned into this library idea that maybe it was a repurposed library. Um, and then we were just really inspired by like a moody color palette because we knew we'd be in that set the most. We're on the run, we're on the move, we're in a lot of places. But that was kind of a home base if we had one for that show. And so it was really important to me that like the layers and the depth and the beauty were really there. And the spaces around the White House were really, really ornamented. The White House, it's a misnomer because like almost nothing was white in the interior, so we wanted to lean into that. And the War Department was a separate building, but we I think really we spent the most time making sure that the War Department and all the rooms that encompass were really right. And then we actually ended up building a backlot set because we needed to show the world of the streets and the relationship of Ford's Theater to the Peterson boarding house was really important. And really, when we got to Savannah, it is an old city, but it's also a living, breathing modern city. And we really couldn't get as wide as we thought we could initially. You look at photos and you see all these amazing preserved buildings, but in between them is like a McDonald's and, like somebody that's remodeled the front of some other facade of a building. So while it is there, it wasn't quite what we had all imagined. So we ended up building a backlot set in a parking lot. Um, and we built the first two stories of about 3 city blocks so that we could have some scope and scale of our world. And I'm actually quite proud of how the backlot came out because there were like moments when I'm like, is this gonna work? But it did, I think. Yeah, it did.
Yeah, I can imagine, but like, I just want people to realize that backlot set was created in a parking lot in Savannah. I assumed that you probably repurposed like the Warner Brothers lot in LA or something. I didn't quite appreciate how much effort went into that backlot set. It's so detailed. It's huge. Like, it's a full block really, and it does show the scale and the kind of the proportionality of where the theater was compared to other parts where the action happens. So
Yeah,
hats off to you all for that. It's really, really
thanks.
impressive. But then you get to the internal parts of the Ford Theater. And now all of us, the audience really is looking forward to, I guess that's the wrong word, the Ford Theater big scene. Did you repurpose the Miller Theater in Philadelphia? Is that correct?
Yes, yes. So actually, it's interesting because um, there's a lot of choices on a period piece of what to keep historically accurate and where you can kind of go. You can reimagine some of that stuff. And I think again, when I started the project, I really thought, in my mind, the first thing I thought I'd be designing is the Ford's Theater, and we'd be building that full interior. And as we got into it, the stage space in Savannah really didn't allow for us to have the full height. And something that we learned early on was that actually that would matter because we knew we wanted the stunt of Booth jumping from the box to the stage. We wanted that to be practical. We didn't want a visual effect there. Um, and like, it's so fun how things come about, but we truly did not have a building high enough that we could build to really get the scope of that fall. And so, I mean, I looked at theaters across the entire eastern side of the United States. I mean, any theater that was of a remotely correct period we considered. And, we made a decision to go to Philadelphia because we also wanted, Philadelphia has some really incredible old buildings that Savannah didn't, and it really more of the architectural style we were looking for. So we put together a Philadelphia unit where we were able to get a couple other pieces like Seward's house. That was all Philadelphia, interior and exterior. And when we got to the Miller Theater, I thought, okay, this is where I get crucified on Reddit about the interior of the Ford Theater not being an exact replica. And it was something that I realized that isn't a museum. This isn't a documentary, and really like the spirit of that assassination, and to make sure that it really felt real and like we could bring the audience with us on the emotional journey. What was more important was the relationship of the stage to the box, and we ended up actually building out the stage at the Miller Theater because that relationship is really unique in the Ford's Theater, that the box is actually over the stage. So we ended up extending the stage there, removing seats, and again, it was a moment where I'm like, well, I think it will work. And then we concepted basically the rest of the Ford's Theater into that in a piece of artwork. I had a concept artist draw up, and I was like, I think this actually works. And we were able to replicate. So it's funny, right? We took some liberties with the box and the orientation of the box, but actually the scenery on the stage is like as accurate a replica as could be to the scenery that was on the stage the
Oh,
night of
really?
the assassination. So, and the way we constructed the flats and painted it, and we tried to use historical techniques of all the framing and everything because we knew we'd be seeing the backside. So I was hoping, I guess in my heart of hearts, I was hoping that the people that were going to come for us about the lack of accuracy would see that this was actually a conscious choice. It wasn't a mistake. We were all acutely aware of what we were doing, but we felt that the emotional beat and the impact of that in that theater ended up being more along with the story we were trying to tell.
Yeah, you got to be careful of those Reddit people because they will find the things they don't like and they will let us all know.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I can imagine that you are striking a balance because you have to be somewhat tethered to historical imagery to make it as, non-anachronistic as possible. But these spaces have to be inhabited by these characters. And this is the big thing for me with production designers, and I hear it all the time. You're creating the look and feel of the series, but you don't want it to just look like a set with props on it. It has to be, you have to overcome the inherent artifice of what you're doing so that you can get to something authentic and lived in so that we can come along for the story. So that
Mm.
obviously must have been your guiding principle. Make it look accurate enough, but it's got to be something that we can believe in. Is that an accurate statement?
Definitely. I mean, the design of the box of at Ford's Theater that President Lincoln was sitting in was actually enclosed and quite like tied in. And we go back to that box in a dream sequence, and we really needed something that also could be shootable, and we didn't. And there is in talking about artifice, um, whenever we build a set, we always have the ability to remove a wall to put the camera where the wall is. But I find that more and more we're still building those things into sets because that's just standard practice. But I actually find that more and more we're using less of that because we're kind of getting away from that style of filmmaking that is artificial feeling. And like there's really sort of this tendency towards what is real and what is in the moment and what is true as opposed to what maybe makes the perfect shot. But there is still a reality of shooting in a space that's fully enclosed around a person to get that emotional beat of an assassination of a president. I mean, it's not an easy task. So I was nervous about Miller Theater, and I was hoping people saw it for what it ended up being, which I think was a really effective way to show that moment in history.
Yeah, I totally agree. I thought it was extremely effective. Another thing I wanted to talk about was that during this period, most of the light, or all of the light, would have been from the sun, from candles, or from gaslight. Does that
Mhm.
inform the choices you make about color palette, textures, and materials?
Yes, absolutely. We were very conscious of that. Whenever I built sets, we really followed a lot of the design principles of that time period, which making sure windows were facing the right directions, making sure they were big, and making sure we could get a lot of natural light in spaces. And then in addition to that, whenever we were scouting locations, some of that was inherent in the spaces we were in because we were trying to be in historical buildings, but we were kind of right at the cusp of when electricity was being introduced. So again, Savannah, a lot of the buildings are from the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. And
Mm.
our story is 1865, which means our buildings should really be from like the 1700s. And so that was, again, another driving like principle of why we ended up building the backlot, was because even though we were in historic buildings, we weren't really, they weren't actually old enough for some of the things we were doing. But, oh, bless you, if that was a sneeze. um, but in terms of the lighting, we as a production designer, it's amazing how much of our job encompasses lighting and how important lighting is in our jobs. But that's especially true pre-electricity because you can't make things so dark that you can't see anything. And so we did quite a few camera tests to see how dark could we make the War Department, because I really wanted that to be a moody, moody space. And the first block director of photography was Bob Humphreys, who was like an amazing collaborator on this. And again, it's like you can only make a show that has an effective design if everyone's on board for the risks you're willing to take. And so Bob and I both really wanted that space to be moody. So we agreed that it could be a dark space, especially Stanton's office and the telegraph room. But then we really had to ramp up the number of windows and opportunities to push light in. And then we had to be really strategic about the fixtures that where we placed them and making sure that every table had a gas lamp, because that's what would have been real. So um, yeah, it was a, again, naive on my part when I was like, oh yeah, pre-electricity, and really getting into the design of what that means, like it does add another layer of what you have to design.
I love the War Department. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it has like a second level with a balcony that kind of goes around it. It does look very library-esque, and I love how you've got these light fittings that kind of drop down, and it's like everything's looming over these very important men making these very important decisions. That kind of
Yeah.
spatial awareness for a designer must be really critical, I suppose, to you trying to help tell the story. Is that right?
Definitely. I mean, another challenge in Savannah was there aren't stages in the way that we're used to sound stages being. So I'm used to like big open spaces, big high ceilings. And the space that we built the War Department was a warehouse that had these big I-beams, like every, I don't know, 25 feet. And so I had to fit this extremely large set, but I had to encompass these I-beams of the actual physical warehouse building into the design. So it was funny because there was a draft of the War Department that was much smaller. And early in the design process, Monica and we were talking, and she's like, I really feel like this needs to be bigger. And I said, like, well, it's either like this size or significantly bigger because of the challenges of the spaces we're in, which again, shooting in LA or even Atlanta, you're used to more traditional soundstage, which you're not thinking of, you don't have to, you can make things whatever size you want. So yeah, it was an opportunity. I think with the telegraph room in particular, I wanted that to feel like a two-story room because I wanted the scale of those telegraph poles, those telegraph tables to really feel like they could fit and not be, we wanted the space to be beautiful. And I knew we would be in there quite a bit. And I really wanted Bob to have the freedom, and later Trevor, our second block DP, Trevor Forrest. I wanted them both to feel like they had the flexibility to create a lot of really unique shots in there, because at a certain point, even though it's beautiful and it's interesting and the actors are doing an incredible job, there's only so much people talking over a telegraph. Like it's still something that's like not that relatable to an audience, a modern audience. And so I wanted to make sure that the cinematography wasn't hemmed in at all by the set, and that there were many opportunities for interesting blocking for the directors and interesting shots for the DPs. I mean, that really is what kind of pushed me towards making the second story of that. And I was actually really pleased that they used it. Sometimes you build that
Yeah.
stuff and it's used. So I was very happy to see that they did do that.
I can imagine that would be very gratifying for when the creative team uses all the space that you've designed. Can you imagine doing all that effort and then it just gets ignored? That would be horrifying. Um,
Well, that's a lot of
yeah,
production design.
that's a lot. Yeah. Chloe, thank you for your time. I note that you were nominated for an Emmy a few years ago for Drunk History. So that was for the Hamilton era. Let's hope you get a second nomination for the Lincoln era. Thank you for your time and congrats on some great work.
Thank you so much. Pleasure talking to you.